There really aren't too many people who've had the influence over young men like Jordan Peterson once did. The man was simply a hero of the disaffected youth throughout the entire globe. We watched as he ordained a spiritual answer to our suffering in this modern world, and so many held him singularly responsible for the new trajectory of their lives. But this man of the last few years is so fundamentally different from the person originally offered that most of the ones who once deeply respected him now have a sincere disdain for him. It was in 2016 when Jordan Peterson's fame first came to him. This was when he publicly opposed the Canadian Bill C-16, which was legislation that proposed making the misgendering of somebody a literal crime. So Jordan objected on the grounds that there should be no compelled speech in a free society. He asserted that this was the most important battle to be fought. And he said he was willing to risk everything over it because the creep towards authoritarianism began with linguistic control and censorship. So he claimed, at least. While his protest is what identified him as a contemptible right-wing adjacent voice, he had actually been building a portfolio behind the scenes for years, which immediately reinforced this modest fame. And the attention nearly instantly catapulted him to incredible heights. But prior to the fame, Jordan had received his PhD from McGill University in clinical psychology, then went on to teach at Harvard until settling at the University of Toronto in 1998. As a professor there, his courses covered lots of subjects, all within psychology, which even included psychopharmacology. Jordan was a wildly popular teacher, and a ton of former students have come out to corroborate this. And given he was aware of these talents, he started posting recordings of his lectures on YouTube back in 2013. And you can often hear students even clapping when he ends class. So when Jordan received the media attention he did, the pipeline from the Googling of his name to finding his lectures started really flowing. And young men were enchanted by these sermons as they promoted personal responsibility along with the proposition that life is suffering. He demanded that it was our duty as people, but particularly as men, to willingly accept this suffering. As a college student at the time myself, I watched more of Jordan's lectures than the actual classes I was paying for. Peterson had grasped the zeitgeist of our generation, and he poured out exactly what we were searching for: meaning and adventure in a world filled with vice and safety. And the mythological undertone which he spoke on drew in anyone that even slightly yearned for an adventurous life. And it's no coincidence that the time period of Jordan's rise also coincided with the cultural tear of the Trump campaign in 2016. Because at this point in the West, the veneer that had been laid over civilization for the last 80 years was starting to crack. The propaganda was finally too absurd. People now needed an explanation as to why reality was not aligning with perception. And Jordan articulated these contradictions in an impressively palatable way. So, as his cultural prominence increased, Jordan was soon brought on as a recurring guest on Joe Rogan's podcast, and these appearances helped spawn the cringeworthy intellectual dark web. The members of this new coalition all claimed to be defenders of the classical liberal values which they insisted had been what founded America and the West more generally. They promoted America and the West as a doctrine, not as a people. And they framed this doctrine as the only possible defense against the woke society we faced. Most importantly, though, as many of the members were victims of censorship themselves, they claimed that according to their own ideology, no subject should ever be off the table. And after the platforming by Rogan, Jordan was launched to even greater levels of fame. He then went on an international speaking tour where he sold out stadiums, and he released a majorly successful book on the heels of this ascension. It was all actually very simple. The young men of the world truly thirsted for the responsibility, adventure, and authenticity that he preached about. And rather than viewing him as a political force, he was really considered more of a philosopher than anything else. He would go out of his way to avoid political statements, insisting that this was just not his role. And we looked to him as a wise elder, who had mastered this realm and merely sought to pass on his wisdom. We didn't care about his views on the tax rate. He was a Gandalf-like figure for us. Now, since a consistent person's political views and behavior should naturally flow from their broader values, it's always the expectation for these things to align at least theoretically, even if the implementation is imperfect. But as Jordan started to comment on more direct elements of society that blurred the line between what was political and what was personal, we saw the man we once knew literally wither away and die as he departed from the philosophical and moved into the political. And from what I can tell, the entry into the right-wing sphere is either done with the force of a wrecking ball or by dipping toes in the water. There really seems to be no in-between. And though Jordan was absolutely poised to leverage the exceptional weight of his philosophical convictions and transform them into political directives, all we continued to see was a wimpy, unsure deployment that screamed, "I think I can convince the New York Times to say I'm not so bad if I just explain it this way." And with this indecisive shift, we began to see the cracks within Jordan himself. We saw that this man was actually not truly serious in his beliefs. He wanted praise, he wanted a living legacy, he wanted money, but he did not actually want to right the world, because the price he would have had to pay for it was far too high. So, when the mob came for the Supreme Court Justice nominee Brett Kavanaugh, Peterson weighed in with other fellow intellectual dark web members and said that if confirmed, Kavanaugh should step down, regardless of his actual guilt. And after all this time of preaching the importance of pursuing truth, no matter where it leads you, this was his suggestion. He was also consistently asked about Donald Trump and the broader right-wing youth movement, but he dodged nearly every pointed political question that he could. If he was ever cornered, he usually offered a soft half-denunciation or even a psychoanalysis which was supposed to make his true stance ambiguous. He eventually said he'd maybe vote for Trump on a whim, but he couldn't even really defend that statement with any conviction. You see, Jordan's entire ideology was a directive towards the hero's journey. It was a command to be steadfast in what you knew to be truthful, regardless of the outside world, as you journey toward redemption and triumph. This is the most masculine template for a man to follow. It's inherently right-wing, and yet he couldn't even tell you with certainty if Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump was the right choice for president. And this was obviously a result of social pressure, because in 2024, as the culture shifted, he would finally come out and announce that if he could, he would vote for Trump over Kamala. A remarkable conclusion to draw after only a decade in this space. But a few years following the rise, the world got the stunning news that Jordan Peterson had checked himself into rehab at the end of 2019. And seemingly as soon as he arrived, he was gone. His fans were beyond confused. The man who had promoted strength in spite of the easy outs the modern world offered was heavily using anti-anxiety medication. We truly believed it had to be a mistake. Maybe it was the media framing it dishonestly, but it was true, and he was gone. And when the coronavirus scandal erupted only months later, we saw the authoritarian clampdown Jordan had warned of, right beside a literal color revolution he had also described in his lectures on the Soviet Union. Gen X and boomers had no idea how to respond to this deployment of political power. And young men, including myself, were absolutely desperate as we searched for the man we thought was ready to take on this fight with the force of the millions of young men by his side. And in the exact moment where his life's work and wisdom could have culminated into a nearly divinely ordained battle between good and evil, he was nowhere to be found. And we had to fare without him. We lived through the hell and chaos with no sage, but in the end, this was rightfully so. He never had the will to lead us. It wouldn't be until 2022 that he would really be seen again. And at first it felt as though Gandalf the Grey had returned to us as Gandalf the White. He seemed to have aged 10 years in two, and we couldn't wait to hear his condemnation for the political forces used during the propaganda circus of the virus. But instead of a triumphant return, what we got was a frail old man who had been vaccinated so that he might be left alone, a man who wouldn't even take responsibility for his addiction, a man who complained for hours about just how horrible his drug withdrawals were as he excused choosing to take the benzos as a simple result of his ignorance. This was the reason given after having taught college courses on psychopharmacology. But the icing on the cake of his transformed persona was the new and surely lucrative contract with the Daily Wire. And after a letdown of this magnitude and the clear inconsistencies between his passionate pronouncements and his actual actions, it became obvious that there were other bizarre behaviors in the past that had gone overlooked. The most self-conscious thing Jordan did, which he has still never addressed, I don't believe, is his hair transplant. He was nearly 60 years old when he underwent this procedure. It's an incredibly vain thing to do for an elderly married man that promotes the rejection of vanity, the acceptance of morality, and coming to terms with the inherent impermanence of the material world. To not even have the honesty to admit, yeah, this is vain, but I still did it, really shows how vapid and self-conscious he is at heart. He also began dressing like a gay high school theater kid shortly after his return. This typically coincides with egomania, same as when people start wearing sunglasses inside. I don't know any other 60-year-old men that decided to get into the fashion game. But besides the external vanity moves, he also gave some clearly dishonest excuses over the years, which were obviously said in order to cover up whatever the more embarrassing and true story was.
Well, the worst response, I think we're allergic to, or allergic, whatever the hell this is, having an inflammatory response to something called sulfites. And we had some apple cider that had sulfites in it, and that was really not good. Like, I was done for a month. That was the first time I talked to Sam Harris.
You were done for a month?
Oh, yeah. It took me out for a month. It was awful.
Really?
Yeah. So I would say,
so this is right before this whole truth conversation with Sam Harris that got stuck in the mud. During.
So I think the day I talked to Sam was like the worst day of my life. Not because of talking to Sam, but it was
just physically.
Oh, Jesus, I was so dead. But I didn't want to not do it. Because
apple cider, like what was it
sulfites
doing?
In it.
What was it doing to you?
Oh, it produced an overwhelming sense of impending doom. And I seriously mean overwhelming. Like, there's no way I could have lived like that if that would have lasted for... See, Mikhaila knew by that point that it would probably only last a month, and I was like...
A month?
Yeah,
from
a month.
Fucking cider?
Oh, I didn't sleep that month. I didn't sleep for 25 days. I didn't sleep at all. I didn't sleep at all for 25 days.
How is that possible? That
I'll tell you how it's possible. You lay in bed, frozen in something approximating terror for 8 hours, and then you get up.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah.
Without belaboring this, it's really quite evident that Jordan has this self-indulgent way of trumping up his small personal issues to seem as if they were a biblical curse, as if he's just different and noble for being the victim of these afflictions.
So whatever this illness has that's plagued my family, my father, my grandfather, multiple cousins, and a lot of immunological problems on my mother's side too. I had a cousin whose daughter died of immunological problems.
But there is no humility in these explanations, only grandiosity. He rarely made any concessions, and concessions are what help you determine someone's actual honesty. Now, I'll admit these gripes are minor, certainly contradictory to his teachings, but very natural human impulses and can be understood given the human condition. But what is most incriminating is the fact that Jordan owes his entire career to the biblical stories and the wisdom he derived from them, yet still can't defend them with any conviction. And he always spoke in a way which clearly implied his belief in the truth of both the stories and the ideology they constructed, often citing their utility when implemented as literal evidence of this. But as is habitual, he couldn't even admit his belief in God. He would instead say,
So people often ask me, do you believe in God? Which I don't like that question. First of all, it's an attempt to box me in a sense. And the reason that it's an attempt to box me in is because the question is asked so that I can be firmly placed on one side of a binary argument. And the reason I don't like to answer it is because A, I don't like to be boxed in, and B, because I don't know what the person means by believe or God. And they think they know. And the probability that they construe belief and construe God the same way I do is virtually zero. So it's a question that doesn't work for me on multiple levels of analysis. But strangely enough, just as we were talking, the answer to that question popped into my head. I act as if God exists.
And then we saw his weakness and sheer inability to take a true stance once again as he debated 20 leftists over Christianity. Here is how this beacon of strength, consistency, and wisdom approached the simple question of whether he was a Christian.
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either you're a Christian or you're not.
I won't talk to you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
He even had them change the original title from 1 Christian versus 20 atheists to Jordan Peterson versus 20 atheists. And he continued to never take a stance on any genuinely controversial issues. During the lead up to the 2024 election in the US, Jordan interviewed Mike Pence and even tweeted a defense for his presidency. But remember here, what this allowed for Jordan was the ability to keep a facade which presented him as an open-minded thinker. But in actuality, he was just cowardly and scared to death of making a stand for something that was either unpopular or might end up failing. So he retreated to the philosopher role to avoid any criticism and stay above the actual discussion. Ironic for someone who claimed you must give up the ability to be anything in order to be something. And as is the case with nearly everyone, Jordan stays far away from the Jewish question. And it's here where we see another example of hypocrisy. He claimed for years that no topic was off the table, and that this principle was actually vital to the survival of a free society. But while he has also built much of his career on regurgitating Alexander Solzhenitsyn and parading the Gulag Archipelago as the book that brought down the Soviet Union, how exactly does he address Solzhenitsyn's other book, 200 Years Together?
It's so difficult to convey. First of all, I haven't read this book, and I do want to read the book, so thank you for giving me the book.
You're welcome.
I can't do it.
That's okay.
It sure seems some things are off limits. And then we saw a bizarre defense of the indefensible. Here's his tweet to Netanyahu after October 7th. He finds the strength to have conviction on Israel, somehow. But once we started getting this crap, I basically discarded everything I ever learned from him.
I met a couple of Orthodox Jews in New York, and they said to me on the street that they call me rabbi, which was it's a hell of a thing to hear. So Lucifer is the morning star, and he's the angel of the untrammeled intellect. That's how he's portrayed in Milton, right? And he's allied in some strange way with the serpent in the Garden of Eden.
If I might just interject, if he's the morning star, what do you do in the morning after the morning star rises? You wake up.
Right.
Woke.
Right.
The most fundamental disqualifier of Jordan's actual strength of character, I think, is his daughter Mikhaila. He preaches monogamy, with marriage being a devotion. He's implied its indissolubility even. And yet his daughter had married a seemingly good man, had a child, and then ended up getting divorced shortly after to basically find herself because she wasn't happy. What happened to marriage as a commitment? If he can't raise his daughter right, who the hell is he to try and raise us? And Jordan's never addressed this in a truly critical manner and actually defended the choice on Piers Morgan. And fair enough, it's not appropriate to slander family and friends publicly. But he should have never let her ride the coattails of his fame to begin with, especially if she has no adherence to his earlier teachings.
It was very, very difficult to get divorced considering what my dad talks about. It made me stay in a relationship longer than I should have. I don't agree with the more conservative story of divorce that people are being told. I think being in a relationship that's not good for you, I think you should get out of that relationship.
Her podcast is pathetic. She offers zero insights on anything, but she saw an opportunity to make herself somebody important too. Slight streak of narcissism, it appears.
I get Botox.
And she also posts lots of photos like this, which clearly market herself sexually. But what end is this exactly for as a woman on her second marriage? I actually watched her come on stage to open her father's show a few years ago. She was wearing a miniskirt zebra dress with a front zipper from her boobs down to the bottom of her dress. Really? And then there was that scandal which proved she had flown to Romania to visit Andrew Tate. How are we even talking about this? Who cares if he didn't actually have sex with her? What on earth does that say on its own? She claims she went for business. Well, she runs Jordan's business, which is another ridiculous move by Jordan, making her the CEO of his company. What an absolute joke. He also has her break tough news for him, like she did in 2019 about his rehab. And he's continued this. In fact, she recently shared this post about his new allergy to air. But after Jordan's final metamorphosis into this fashion-conscious vain stooge of the Daily Wire and Ben Shapiro, he started to notice quite a few hate comments coming in, especially on Twitter. And he noticed they were often coming from anonymous accounts. After living in a world of so much praise for him, he couldn't handle this change, especially the sudden drop in his viewership numbers. So Jordan started frantically calling for identity verification on all of social media. He claimed that this was the only way to force the anonymous users out of their dark tetrad behavior. He referred to these accounts that would consistently hate on him and his family as psychopathic troll demons, among other allegations. Well, I know this accusation to be false, and I'll be happy to explain, Jordan. I am one of these troll demons, and I was as big of a fan of you as there could be. Your lectures changed my entire life in college. I bought tickets to your show just to see you in the flesh, and yet here am I, years later, criticizing you. But somehow you have never once even contemplated the idea that maybe it's you that changed. Maybe you are the one that's rejecting all your teachings on a fundamental level. Nobody demanded you to be perfect. No one even asked for it. But we do expect the consistent application of principles from someone who preaches philosophy. You are the one who has changed, and we're just disgusted by it. These are not bots spamming your account. This isn't a coordinated attack. This is the response you get for selling out to Ben Shapiro, bowing to Netanyahu, promoting a genocide, calling for censorship, refusing to engage with the real questions which actually challenge your political model, and then telling us that we are the problem for calling you out on it. Grow a spine, reflect on your failures, look in the place you least want to, just as you told us to do. You are not special. You are a man with the same inherent human condition as all of us. Do not excuse and rationalize your incongruent behavior as acceptable because of your status. You cry on camera and in public about how beaten up young men are. And then you trash us as psychopathic troll demons because you've gotten some negative Twitter comments over things that deserve hate under the criteria of your own ideology. You called Nick Fuentes, who is the spokesman of the young men who were all your fans just half a decade ago, a rat, and refused to talk to him. I thought nothing was off the table, Jordan. Seems like one thing is off limits, and it sure happens to always be off limits. But if you're going to be that way, at least don't give us this crap about how much of a free speech warrior or any type of warrior you are. You work for Ben Shapiro. You've become a frail, shameless, greedy coward who has never put himself on the line to protect anyone that was truly a threat to the actual psychopathic regime that runs the world. You have turned on us. We did not turn on you.